بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وسلم تسليما كثيرا إلى يوم الدين. Today, inshallah, we are starting with the more interesting bits. The Musannif, the author, inshallah, will list the sections and subsections of Usul al-Fiqh before we dive into the first of the topics that we list, which inshallah will be the divisions of speech or the divisions of language, which will cover the first or the second section that is covered in Usul al-Fiqh books. The first one would be uh, introductions into logic. This one will be introductions into language, and then after that will come the more Usul-based topics of the book. So he says, Rahimahullah, وَأَبْوَابُ أُصُولِ الْفِقْهِ. Abwab, or doors in Arabic, is what authors use as chapters. In any book you read, depending on the length. If it's a short book like this, they will say abwab as the chapters. If it's a longer book, they will say kitab, something, something, and then under that will be abwab. So if you're reading a longer fiqh book, that's even if it's one volume, they will use the word kitab as the first section. So it'll be kitab al-tahara, the book of tahara, and then under that will be, for example, the bab, the door of water, the door of tayammum, etc. So when you guys get to later books and you see the word kitab inside the kitab, you see the word book inside the book, it doesn't mean it's a different book, it just means the section. But because this is a small book, it goes directly into abwab. And the abwab of usul al-fiqh. So here he mentions them all in one list. Some of the things we're about to list are subsections of other sections mentioned in this list. Additionally, a lot of the topics are not mentioned in this list itself. But that's not necessarily something wrong with the list, because as we said many times, this book is meant to be very summarized. So it just gives you a general overview of the most important topics that are going to be covered in this book and in other books. وأبواب أصول الفقه. So first one is أقسام الكلام. Kalam, which is speech, has categories, and these categories can be divided in various ways depending on what you're looking at. So it could be command or prohibition. It could be حقيقة or majaz, reality or metaphor, roughly speaking. It could be khabar or insha. There's many ways to look at this, and he's going to list a assortment of these different ways. And then al-amr wal-nahi, commands and prohibition. So this falls under the aqsam al-kalam, but it has a larger importance due to the nature of command and prohibition in usul al-fiqh. So he mentions this specifically, even though it's covered under types of statements, because it has a larger role as opposed to other things, such as, khabar and insha. It has no relevance in usul al-fiqh. Al-aam wal-khas, general and specific. So general and specific is, again, one of the very central topics in usul al-fiqh. What he doesn't mention here is al-mutlaq wal-muqayyad, restrained and unrestrained. That's the translation I like to use. Al-aam and al-khas and al-mutlaq and al-muqayyad are very similar topics, and they're both very central, and they're topics that are often confused by students. It's actually very normal for a student to reach the second or third book in his fiqh curriculum and still not be sure entirely what the difference between these two things are. Now here he only talks about general and specific. He doesn't mention restrained and unrestrained. And inshallah, we'll go into great depths when we get to these topics. But I'm mentioning al-mutlaq al-muqayyad because it is definitely important for these to be mentioned, and many of the commentators on al-Waraqat will include this comment that this should be listed, al-mutlaq wal-muqayyad, restrained and unrestrained. Now, al-mujmal wal-mubayyan. Al-mujmal and al-mubayyan, here he chooses, the translator, he chooses ambiguous and, where did it go? Ambiguous and clear. So al-mujmal and al-mubayyan are also can very easily be considered from the aqsam al-kalam, from the divisions of speech, the divisions of statements. However, again, this is one of the important topics in Usul al-Fiqh, and so it deserves to be mentioned on its own. Another way of dividing speech is the next one, al-Zahir and al-Mu'awwal. Al-Zahir and al-Mu'awwal, in Arabic we say ظهر الشيء, something appeared. ظهر, the verb, means it appeared or it rose. So ظهر القمر, the moon appeared, or anything, any object or person, we say ظهر. This is the verb. The adjective of someone who's doing this verb is ظاهر. He's apparent, he's clear, he's seen. And these are used for texts that are, we say the apparent meaning of this hadith is this, meaning the ظاهر meaning of this hadith is this, and al-mu'awwal is the opposite of that, which is something that is not ظاهر. It is, if we take a hadith and it has an apparent meaning, but we reject this apparent meaning for a more hidden meaning, this hidden meaning, or less apparent meaning, we should say, this less apparent meaning is called al-mu'awwal. And there's actually a third category within these two, which is al-nas, text. Nas is something that has a clear-cut meaning. It has only one meaning, and anyone who rejects this is deviant. For example, when we say that the prohibition of zina is nas, it is text. That is clear-cut. But if you look at, for example, the timing of Asr, this is something that is in some hadith ظاهر, because you can have Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu and Imam Malik using the same hadith and having different opinions. So one of them chooses the apparent meaning, which is a little more clear in the Arabic language, and the other one chooses something, a meaning that could only be seen through the use of external evidence, through the use of what we call a qarina. It's an external piece of evidence that allows us to choose the less apparent meaning. And this is the underlying concept that the Ash'ari and the Maturidiyya use when they do ta'wil of a attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's the same concept, we use it in fiqh. Another concept is wal-af'al. So I think there's a typo, I think, in this one. There shouldn't be lam al-ta'rif, or this should be in parentheses. So the next category is wal-af'al, meaning actions. And yeah, I think this is not included in the manuscripts. So what is meant by actions is the actions of the Prophet ﷺ, but his name is not actually included in the text as far as I know. So that's why there's a grammatical mistake by adding this in here. Wal-af'al, the actions of the Prophet ﷺ, have their masail and things that are discussed. Does the Prophet ﷺ doing something imply something being obligatory, or is it recommended? Does the action have to be in accordance with something he said for it to be obligatory? So does it have to be something he said and then he does this action, or is the action itself good enough for making something obligatory? All these are masail, all these are issues under this subsection. And al-nasikh wal-mansukh, something that abrogates and something that is abrogated. So when you have a hukum shar'i, you have a shar'i ruling, and then you have a shar'i ruling that replaces it either fully or partly. This new shar'i ruling is called nasikh, and the other one is called mansukh. Again, there's a lot of masail under this to be studied, just so nobody misunderstands that we're actually learning these concepts by going over their names right now. We're just touching upon slightly what we're going to study in depth in the next classes. So we're just mentioning the definitions of these things. What ijma' consensus? Which consensus is binding? Which one is not binding? Um, is the consensus of only the Sahaba considered, or is every generation's consensus important? Um, if one person goes against the consensus, is that considered good enough? If there's a consensus and then someone from that ijma', from that consensus changes his mind, is that good enough? All these are masail that have to be studied, and more that I did not mention. Wal akhbar, so um, reports basically. Um, they could be considered a hadith. Depending on the definition you use, this could be basically the same meaning as a hadith, could refer to all texts. And al-qiyas, analogy, again, a lot of things to go over in qiyas. Al-Waraqat, as a book, is not the best at getting introduced into qiyas because um, it's just the choice of the author to summarize in a way that does not include a lot of qiyas in it. In later books, you'll see that qiyas has a lot of um, terminology that is not very easy for the beginner. Um, so the beginner who doesn't have an introduction into Usul al-Fiqh, he can go over al-'am, al-khas, wal-mujmal, al-mubayyan, and he can understand most of it. But to understand the subsections of qiyas in detail, it requires a lot of terminology used in the fields of both language and logic. And so uh, going into detail for qiyas is uh, better left for a little later on. Wal-hadr wal-ibaha, so prohibition um, and permissibility. وترتيب الأدلة, the priority of evidences. So this is basically a brief overview of how different people do tarjih, how they choose one evidence over the other. So for example, we have two conflicting evidences. Is the priority to find a way to bring them in harmony? Is the priority to see which one is newer and take the newer one? Is the priority to choose which one is stronger, which one has better narrators, even if they're both authentic? These are all different ways that fuqaha have chosen the priority of evidences. وصفة المفتي والمستفتي, so the attributes or the description of the mufti and the mustafti, and the rulings of mujtahideen. This is the last section in the book. Okay. So this is again just a brief overview of the topics. Again, not even a complete overview of the topics in al-Waraqat, let alone other usul books. There's actually many things in usul books that has to be studied later on that is not covered in al-Waraqat, such as Dalil al-Khitab, Fahwa al-Khitab. There's a lot of topics that al-Waraqat does not touch upon. And so this list does not even touch upon all the topics within al-Waraqat. And so this is just the, again, basic concepts, very basic definitions that we're going to go over later on. So the first section of what we listed, أقسام الكلام. So al-kalam in speech, those of you who are not Arabic or have studied Arabic at a basic level, such as al-Ajrumiyya, or I don't know what else beginners might use today's curriculums, you will go over a definition of kalam, which is اللفظ المركب المفيد. It's a lafz, it's a thing that is pronounced, and it is murakkab, meaning it is put together of different parts, and it is mufid, meaning it has a meaning. It has a complete meaning based off of the meanings that the language was used for, right? So, qama Zayd, Zayd got up, that is kalam. Now, the definition of kalam between the fuqaha and between the mutakallimin and between the people of mantiq, etc., might not always mean the same thing. And this is a concept that is very important for all Shara'i studies, is that the definition of something within the language is not always the same as the definition of something within a field. And we touched upon this slightly when we went over the meanings of fiqh and usul. We said that the definition of fiqh in the Arabic language is not the same thing as the official definition that the usuliyin or the fuqaha use, right? And the same thing goes for many Shara'i things. So just to give an example, the word salah, the 5 daily prayers that we perform, it has a official Shara'i definition, and it is that it's a ritual worship that is composed of XYZ. It has these attributes, it's done in these times. This is the Shara'i definition. However, in the Arabic language, it just means dua. The word salah, it just means dua, to pray, to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for something. And so the definition is different. Similarly, kalam, it means very different things based off, if you go to a linguist or a grammarian, a nahwi, or to a usuli, they mean different things. And so Imam al-Juwayni here, he starts off by saying kalam can be divided in many ways. And he starts off by dividing them in ways that are important to grammarians. So for example, the first one he goes into أقل ما يتركب منه الكلام اسمان. So he says the least of which kalam can be composed of is 2 nouns, right? Such as, again, this might not be of much use to you if you have not studied Arabic grammar, but for example, Zaydun muharib. Zayd is a warrior. So Zayd and muharib, Zayd and warrior, it's a mubtada and khabar. It's a topic and then the report about that topic. Zayd is the topic and warrior is the report. Zayd is a warrior. This is the least that kalam can be composed of, which is 2 nouns or a noun and a verb. So qama Zayd, Zayd got up, or ismun wa harf. So in Arabic grammar, all words have to fall into one of 3 categories: ism, fi'l, and harf. Ism is a noun. It is a word that has a meaning that does not have to be related to a specific time. Verb is a word that has meaning related to a specific time. So it has to be present or past, etc. A harf is anything else. Anything that does not fit the definition of a verb or a noun, it's called a harf. And a harf, it's anything that does not have meaning on its own, such as from, and, but. Ahmed came from the kitchen. If I just say Ahmed, it's not a full sentence, but the meaning of Ahmed is no. If I say the kitchen is not a full sentence, but the meaning of the kitchen is no. If I just say from, okay, what do you mean from? It's not a full meaning. Or if I say just and what? It's not a full meaning. So that's a harf. And as you guys may know, if you do not speak Arabic, the word harf in Arabic also means letter. And so a lot of beginners get confused about this. So speech is not divided into nouns, verbs, and letters. The word harf here does not refer to letters, rather it refers to anything that is not a full meaning on its own. It's anything that is not a noun or a verb. And so the other way, you can divide it is commands and prohibitions. And as we said, we're going to go into this more detail. He's not just going to mention this here, he's going to mention it later because it has vast implications in Usul al-Fiqh, in because the Sharia is, generally speaking, composed of many, many commands and prohibitions. Other things, sure, but a vast majority is commands and prohibitions. So we're going to go into that later. A different way you can look at it is khabar wa istikhbar. So, khabar is to tell someone something. And istikhbar is the flip side of that, which is to ask about something. Now, this division is not used much when studying Nahu. The other way to look at this is khabar and insha, and I mentioned this a little earlier this class. This is something that a lot of grammarians use. Any Arabic sentence has to fall into khabar or insha. A khabar is a report. Insha is um, it's almost initiating something. So the way we know the difference is a khabar in and of itself, it can be correct or incorrect. Insha cannot be incorrect, cannot be correct or incorrect. So if I say Ahmed came from the kitchen, this is a report. I can say no, this is incorrect. Ahmed did not come from the kitchen. Or I could say I had a good day today. This is a khabar, it's a report because it can be correct or incorrect. Insha is something that does not have correctness or incorrectness. So if I say, do you have a pencil? You cannot tell me, no, you're incorrect. Because I'm not making a report. I'm initiating conversation. I'm making a question. And so insha does not have the capability of being correct or incorrect. Or if I tell you, for example, how old are you? You cannot tell me, oh no, you're wrong. I didn't make a report. There's no report being made. There's no khabar. So khabar and insha is a division of speech that is very important if you want to study Arabic later on. Much more important than خبر الاستخبار. وينقسم أيضا إلى تمني وعرض وقسم. So speech can also be divided into تمني, exclamations, suggestions, and oaths. Not relevant to Usul al-Fiqh, but he's just giving this as an example. ومن وجه آخر. And this is the first one that is important, and he's going to go into it in detail. ومن وجه آخر ينقسم إلى حقيقة ومجاز. Speech can be divided into literal and figurative. And as you can probably guess, this applies to many reports, also verses, not just, so we can apply to verses, a hadith, a lot of it, we have to look into whether this is literal or figurative. Some people like to translate majaz as metaphor, and this is not the best translation, and the reason is majaz has many things that cannot be translated as metaphors. So figurative speech in English, they divide it into metaphors, similes, all these different types of things. A lot of people just assume it's all called metaphors, but if you're talking with someone who's really good at English and is trying to learn about these things, he might not understand you. So it's best to translate it as figurative speech. Now, the division between figurative and real, or figurative and literal, changes depending on who you ask. And the reason is the definition of literal changes depending on who you ask. And actually not many, but it's a theory out there amongst the Arab grammarians. It's a thing that is said and is accepted as a interesting opinion that actually all speech is figurative. That anything that is said is figurative. Nothing is literal, because as humans we've assigned words to things. This word is not a literal representation of this thing. It's trying to bring the image closer, right? So you have a lion, right? We invented the word asad, or in Arabic, as you know, there's many words for a lion. Let's just say asad, or we see this line and we make this word. This thing is called wada in Arabic, wada, or to place. The Arabs placed this lafz, this pronunciation, for this thing, for this animal. This pronunciation itself is not actually the animal itself. And so it's in some form, actually, it is figurative by itself. And so not only does the line between figurative and literal shift around, it can actually shift around to such an extent that everything can be considered figurative, and there's no such thing as being literal. But that's not very useful to the usuli. It would just push him to actually just, you know, redivide redivide figurative speech. If everything is figurative, we just have to redivide it to make it useful to us the way figurative and literal was useful to us before. So we'll leave that off for now. Now, there's no use in going too much into the definition of literal and figurative because the meanings are quite obvious. The first meaning and the main meaning of literal is something that is used in its ordinary meaning. You see, I say that is a lion, then I mean that this is the animal that is known to the Arabs as a lion, as an asad. If I say Ahmad is a lion, this is figurative speech. And it means that we're not using it for its ordinary meaning. We're not using it for the meaning that the Arabs use the word asad. So they came up with the word asad, they assigned it to something. And this thing that they assigned it to does not cover Ahmad. But I'm calling Ahmad a lion because he's brave. So this is the basic meaning of figurative speech that everyone knows. Now, okay, we won't go into حقيقة شرعية and لغوية because we don't have enough time for this class. We'll go into this next time. So we'll go a little more detail into what I just said now. فالحقيقة ما بقي في الاستعمال على موضعه. So we said what we just went over. Literal is what remains in usage for what it was made for. وقيل ما استعمل فيما اصطلح عليه من المخاطبة. And it is also said, this is the second meaning of literal, what it is used for what the conventions of these people use it for. So if we have a group of people and the conventions of this group of people agreed to use a word for something, then it can also be said to be حقيقة. And this convention can be the specific customs of a group of people, a tribe or a nation. It can also be the conventions of a specific field, as we mentioned and touched upon just slightly before, that the fuqaha can have a convention, and within them they use a specific word for a specific thing. So as we said, salah, the haqiqah of salah is dua. However, because the fuqaha agreed all to use salah for a specific thing, which is this ritual worship, which is composed of kneeling and prostrating, etc. Then within that convention, using salah for ritual worship is no longer figurative. It's no longer majaz. It becomes literal. So this is the second usage. We said that the line between literal and figurative shifts. So the first group said literal is only what the word was created for. The second group added more to the literal side. And the more that they added is if after the word was invented, a group of people agreed to use it for something else, then this is also going to be literal. And this makes a lot of sense and is going to be very similar to what the author is going to say as we're going to read next class. I think it's on the next page or after that. Yeah, next page. it wouldn't be bad for you to read ahead if it's not that complicated if you want to read it ahead of time. We'll go into it in detail next class, but this is the more accepted uh, division between literal and figurative, because when I tell you I'm going to um, not even between fuqaha, if me and my brother, I tell my brother I'm going to do salah, what's he going to assume? He's going to assume I'm uh, going to perform the ritual worship. He's not going to assume that I am going to pray, as in making dua. And so it's closer to a literal meaning, because when we use something for figurative speech, it's as if the person needs a reason to know that this is figurative. You know, if I say Ahmed is a lion, there's a reason that I know this is figurative, and it's because I can see that Ahmed is not the animal known as a lion. Whereas if I tell Ahmed I'm going to go perform salah, there's no reason for him to assume I'm going to make dua. And this is because the convention of the word has changed. The convention has changed the meaning of this word. And so it is much closer to what literal speech is. Yes, thousands of years ago, the Arabs did not use the word salah for this, but some point along the way, it has changed. And so they agree that many grammarians and usuliyin agree that when this word has changed, we add it to literal. It's no longer figurative, even if it was figurative at the time that uh, this meaning was changed. So we're going to stop here. I understand that it's not the most convenient place to stop because it is in the middle of the section. So inshallah, next class, we're going to review a bit of what I said regarding haqiqa. I know it can be confusing. So we're going to review what we said, and we're going to touch upon the end of it, and as a whole, it'll form a more cohesive picture. And inshallah, you'll be much more understanding of the differences between haqiqa and majaz, the different camps that define them differently, and the implications that we have for these different definitions in Usul al-Fiqh. So Zoom is showing me 3 minutes and 30 seconds. If anyone has a question before we end for today. Okay. No questions? Alhamdulillah. Okay. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
وعليكم السلام شيخ.